Continuing on with Lecture Day 4 of Early Western Civilization, let's begin our discussion of the Sea Peoples. So, who were the Sea Peoples? That's a good question. Let's talk about what they did first. Well, what they did was around the year circa 1200 BCE, so this is about 400 years after the Minoans declined, okay, and had been destroyed by the double tsunamis in about a 20 to 30 year span. So 400 years after that, this period of disruption is caused by raids from people from all over this area, okay? And so this area is getting attacked constantly not just on the coasts of it and by the seas, okay, of the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, but also overland invasions are happening to the peoples in this area. And so there's major period of disruption during the era of about 1200 BCE, and that lasts for about 600 years, almost 500 to 600 years. What was this disruption? Well, many of the cities on the coasts, as well as inland in this area and here, were attacked. Some of the cities were completely burned to the ground or partially burned to the ground. Villages and towns were definitely not safe, even if cities were, because cities were even bigger, right? And so all of this area around the eastern Mediterranean Sea, as well as also the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor, and this whole area in general, right? Even down to Egypt was attacked. And so, and remember the Hittites that we talked about, the very aggressive, warlike Hittites that controlled the Fertile Crescent and ended up fighting against the Egyptians? Well, they were also weakened during this period, as was Egypt themselves. Not just attacked, but heavily weakened, these peoples, by these Sea Peoples. Now, who were the Sea Peoples? Well, we don't know exactly, because we think it was multiple different groups taking advantage of the Minoans going away and trying to attack the Hittites, the Egyptians, and all other groups. And so it might have been the Mycenaeans or the Phoenicians, which we'll talk about both of those in later lectures. Actually, the Phoenicians in just a few moments, the Mycenaeans next time. The Philistines as well, which are mentioned in the Bible, as well as in other sources, and possibly other groups, all made up the Sea Peoples. So we don't think it was just one group. We think it was actually multiple groups doing it over this period of about 600 years, because they disappear in the year 600 BCE, about 600 years after 1200 BCE. And it was possibly due to capture or defeat by the Babylonians, which we'll get to in a moment as well. Or possibly they just settled down and intermarried the locals they had originally attacked. That over generations, or over just a shorter period than that they decided, okay, well, why keep attacking when we can just kind of move here and live here and then kind of attack elsewhere, or, create our own civilizations here. And so the Sea Peoples are kind of this kind of questionable, definitely not one group, but possibly multiple groups, okay? And so a little bit about the Philistines in general, okay? The Philistines are one of the groups that we believe were Sea Peoples, okay? They are from stories in the Bible, and we actually have traced them today to the city of Ashkelon, right here, Ashkelon, right there, in present-day Israel, okay? So they weren't just in the Bible, they were actually in other in other places. We have found DNA evidence as well as archaeological evidence of them. We have DNA evidence from 10 Philistines buried at that site in Ashkelon, showing that they came from various parts of Europe. So not just from this area, okay, and the areas being attacked by the Sea Peoples, which was this area, but also various parts of the rest of Europe have this kind of DNA sequence of that, including Greece, okay, so yes, that's Sea People region, that were being attacked as well as possibly being attacked from, okay, but also Spain and Portugal, which are both right here, okay, as well as a little bit around Italy, etc. And so it's very interesting that you've got positions from Greece and Spain and Portugal specifically, as well as others, in this DNA strand of people there from the period of about 1200s to 600s BCE. Again, they likely migrated because of the collapse of other civilizations or trade of some sort. And then just kind of traded and moved to Ashkelon and decided not to go back. More evidence about the Philistines is that pottery and architecture change during the 1200s BCE in this area as well. And it's not just the same pottery and architecture being exported, or specifically pottery being exported by the Minoans, but also different ones that isn't from the Hittites and isn't from the Egyptians, but is a different group altogether on their own. And so it's very interesting that the Philistines possibly have a lot more influence in this area than originally thought. Another group that were possibly the Sea Peoples that I mentioned were the Phoenicians. So let's talk about the Phoenicians as a civilization. They lived in the Mediterranean Sea around the same period that the Sea Peoples were raiding, between 1200 BCE to 600 BCE. So again, a civilization that lasted 600 years, while the Minoans that were based out of Crete lasted about 400. Okay? And so while this area was kind of for and these greenish areas on this map are kind of colonies and all from Greece eventually, which we'll talk about in Lecture 5. The Phoenicians were these blue areas, okay? Mostly out of this area originally, and then spread throughout these areas here, including the city of Carthage, which we'll talk about in just a moment, but they mostly based themselves out of here and then created colonies and expanded into these blue areas of the map. Who were they? Well, the Phoenicians were a Canaanite people from the Levant, from the coast of Syria, right here, the Levant. Okay, the Levantine corridor and the Fertile Crescent area, this area right here, they were right on the border of it. And they also were known as the Phoenicians, which we'll get to in just a moment. The Maritime Empire, again, they were a thalassocracy, a maritime empire. They traded throughout this area, as well as all to these green areas, but they created colonies in these blue areas, and cities and towns, while they kind of just traded back and forth with the others. And again, here's Spain, and Portugal is right here, so it's not hard to see that possibly trade with the Phoenicians eventually caused the Philistines to have DNA over here, with Ashkelon, like in the previous map, right? Right there. So, from here. Going back, they obviously had their major trade empire, but they originated in the cities of Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, right here, these three cities. Tyre had a product known as Tyrian purple, which was this reddish-colored purple, okay? Kind of almost a maroonish color. But what is Tyrian purple? What is it from? Well, it's not just created at Tyre. It's actually created by clam shells and oyster shells. Back then, during the 1200s to 600s BCE, as well as for a very long time afterwards, the only way to make the color purple was by using clams and oysters. There was a way to extract it from them, and that the Phoenicians had that kind of locked down, and it kind of passed down to who else controlled the city of Tyre in future generations afterwards. But because of this Tyrian purple, the people of the Phoenicians were known as Phoenicians by others, because they traded this color purple to everybody else, because no one had access to making purple, and they found all of a sudden, hey, they've got a new color that they can put into their wardrobe. And so that's what they ended up doing. They called them the Phoenicians, which means purple people. Okay? The people of the Phoenicians had multiple colonies, as you can see throughout this whole map here, and as we move into this map here. And they traded all over. They didn't just trade in the Mediterranean Sea. They also traded out the Mediterranean Sea right here, and up the coast, along Portugal, along France, and up to England, all the way to England, for tin. England had a huge amount of tin. And so that was extremely important for what? bronze, remember? Tons of places, if we look all the way back to the first map of this video, we have tons and tons of bronze, or copper, in all of these green spots. But tin is all these silver ones. There's not all that much tin in places around the Mediterranean Sea, right? But there's a bunch of tin here. And so that's why the Phoenicians, or the Phoenicians, ended up trading heavily all the way up to England for that tin. The reddish-purple, of course, the purple people, we've already mentioned that, again, because of the city of Tyre right here, which was an island city. We'll talk about Tyre in the next video. Colonies such as Carthage, which were right here, became extremely important, as well as others along this area here. Again, same map, same area, same blue area. In this case, it's just green in this map. And so you end up having this colonization and this trade of different ideas and things like that, as well as different products throughout all of this area, which really helped the Phoenicians out for quite a while. Eventually, some of these cities and all would end up having to be by themselves, as the Phoenician Empire would eventually and later collapse and be taken over and kind of splinter into just only where the colonies are their own ideas and their own nations. And we'll come back to Carthage when we talk about Rome. In the units that we cover Rome and videos that we cover Rome, there are going to be multiple wars between Italy or Rome and Carthage coming up in this course later on. A little bit more about the Phoenicians is they did have an alphabet, a real alphabet. I mentioned this during the Egyptian video that the Phoenicians were one of the first people to ever evolve an actual alphabet, where each letter was its own letter, as opposed to letters being kind of with a sound or a syllable. In this case, they have actually evolved it from the hieroglyphs. Again, not hard to believe because they were trading back and forth with Egypt quite a lot early on and eventually started branching out elsewhere. Their alphabet is pictured right here, okay? And it is 22 consonants, but not a single vowel. And interestingly, it was read right to left, as in you would start this direction and read that way, which is the opposite of how we read today. Okay, so those are some interesting differences of the Phoenician alphabet as opposed to our own modern English alphabet and many modern other alphabets. The Assyrians. We're going to pick up with the Assyrians in the next video.